substance just so that they can arrest them. Can you imagine all of the wasted resources of this? The thousands and thousands of people whose lives are being ruined. 750,000 people were arrested, 730,000 people were arrested last year. That doesn't affect just 730,000 people. It affects millions of people. It affects their families. It affects their employers. It might affect their employees. It affects them if they're college students, because they lose all ability for federal grants. So that 730,000 arrests, and it doesn't stop at the end of the year. Okay, this 730,000 is processed, we'll do the next. It continues all their lives. They might lose professional licenses. They might lose the ability to continue with their education. So when we step back and we see who are the stakeholders, here's what I think. The police, the criminal justice system is not a stakeholder in whether medical marijuana patients should be able to use marijuana, or how much they should be able to use, or how they should be able to grow it. They have absolutely no expertise in this area. Any expertise that they claim to have is negated by their official organization. And their official organization is the California Narcotics Officers Association. You can go onto the internet and look at their position papers, and here's what they say. Marijuana is not a medicine. These people are verbal terrorists. Now, the reason why I say they're verbal terrorists, in order to remain a police officer in California, you have to continually get education. You'd have to take educational classes. And the California Narcotics Officers Association is deputized to give some of these classes. So this is what they're teaching their students, which is police, that marijuana isn't a medicine, that anybody who's using it is using it as a ruse. Don't believe it. Bust them now and let the court sort it out. And they're giving a training session in case anybody, on November 8th through 13th. I'm going to try and register for it. And so they're saying in this, they say that the people who are supporting medical marijuana are just doing it as a means of pushing marijuana onto the public, you know, so that this is a first step. This is the only thing that I agree with them about, that medical marijuana is only a first step, because everybody has a right to use it, whether they're using it medically or recreationally or however they want to use it. And I know that now people will say, now the Narcotics Officers Association will say, well, that's exactly what we said. But let's get real. Does the federal government differentiate between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana? There's no differentiation in the law. And in fact, what do they tell the juries? No matter what the state law might be, the federal government doesn't recognize medical marijuana. So you have this Narcotics Officers Association functioning as verbal terrorists in this war. And then they want to sit down at the table with stakeholders and say, well, we're stakeholders in it too. But I question, where is their stake in it? And I'll give you one example of how this played out very recently. There was recently the Vasconcellos bill, which former Governor Davis is going to decide whether he's going to sign or not. Part of the reason he's going to be former Governor Davis is because he was always apathetic and actually anti-marijuana and anti-medical marijuana. And maybe if he had a little more empathy for a few sick people, he wouldn't be in the terrible position that he's in. But okay, so anyway, this Vasconcellos bill, what this bill originally said, it adopted the the Sonoma guidelines, which were 99 plants and 100 or 200 square feet. Well, after it was ready to go right into the Senate, what happened was Lockyer got a hold of Vasconcellos and they changed it to 6 plants. Now, what expertise does Lockyer have about what 6 plants will produce? What does he know about medicine? Why was he even involved in it? Don't you think it's up for the people of this state to make policy, and then for the Attorney General and the district attorneys to follow that policy and for the police to follow it, rather than for the tail to wag the dog? That's where it's at. We have a police department that is out of control. And I have to get off, but there's one last part of this, which is, if you look at the Oakland Narcotics Bureau, where do you think they're housed? They're not in the Oakland Police Building. They're not at City Hall. They're not in any of their own building. No, they have a space in the federal building. And narcotics divisions all over the country are becoming part of the national police. They're being directed more by the federal government than by their local police chiefs, and they are now becoming part of the anti-terror network, and that's what we're dealing with. We have a big job ahead of us, but we will win this. Here's something for us all to say and think about. These laws are doomed. Thank you.
One thing I might just add as a footnote to what Ed's been saying is there's a school of economics that we use in part at the Independent Institute called the School of Public Choice. And public choice economists are very well aware of what Ed is talking about as far as the incentives that police agencies have in fostering and actually criminalizing behavior for their own benefit. I want to thank Ed for a wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Donald Abrams.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about how I got into this field of doing research on marijuana. It's been a path that's been ongoing for the past 11 years. It started in 1992. I am an AIDS doctor, as was mentioned. I'm also newly appointed the chief of hematology oncology at San Francisco General Hospital. So I take care of patients with cancer and patients with AIDS, and that's what I've been doing during my career. In 1992, the AIDS conference was being held in all places in Amsterdam. And I was in my hotel room, some of you understand that, yes, glancing at CNN when I noticed Mary Rathbun was being arrested. Mary was a volunteer in our clinic at San Francisco General Hospital. She was about 70. She was known as Brownie Mary. She won the Volunteer of the Year award 2 years running because she came and took our patients to x-ray and took their blood to the lab and picked up their prescriptions. And she also baked brownies for her kids. And here I was in Amsterdam watching Brownie Mary being arrested in Sonoma for baking her brownies. When I got back home, there was a letter addressed to the director of research at the AIDS program at San Francisco General Hospital. Somebody brought it to me thinking I was a good enough person to respond to it, and it was from Rick Doblin, who's the president of the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS. Rick is a graduate of a PhD graduate of the Harvard School of Government, and his particular interest is in drug policy reform. And Rick suggested that a clinical trial demonstrating the medicinal benefit of marijuana should come from Brownie Mary's institution, as if she were our dean or something. Well, 1992 was a bad year for people living with HIV because we really had no drugs. We only had 3, and I had just finished a trial comparing the 3 of them. So as a clinical trialist, this was sort of a gauntlet that I decided should be picked up. So I began to develop a clinical trial to look at smoked marijuana in patients with the so-called AIDS wasting syndrome, a very common condition at the time where patients lost weight, became very skeletal, had diarrhea, no appetite. And marijuana is something that these patients were using to a large extent, obtaining it from Dennis Peron's Cannabis Club in downtown San Francisco before it was closed.